It's amazing to talk about when things are going right and what the brain does in those situations. But it's equally useful and informative to think about when things go wrong, because these human diseases, they impact the brain and they show us how the brain works normally because they're taking out a certain function. Now, we're going to talk about a few examples of this, and I'm going to bring in with trauma. And trauma, or what we call sometimes traumatic brain injury, is a really important world problem. And it ranges from things like falling off a chair, to motor vehicle collisions, to military blast injuries. They can really injure your brain in an acute way. Now, some of these traumas have become quite famous, and there's one famous example of a guy named Phineas Gage. He was a very responsible, hyper-religious railroad worker, and he was blasting rock to put down railroad. And in those times, what you did was you made a hole in the rock, you put your gunpowder, sand, and a fuse in there, and then you took a long tamping iron. It looks like a long pole, pretty much like what he's holding. And he went tamp, tamp, kaboom. And then this pole, this tamping iron, flew through his head and landed 80 feet away from him. And it was a mess. You know, actually, the doctor who came by didn't really think it had happened. He thought it was bogus until the guy stood up, he throws up, and a little brain comes out of his skull. So after this day, he somehow miraculously survived this accident, and this guy who once used to be hyper-religious, responsible, the guy you want on the job, the guy who's on time, became this guy who just cursed all the time, was never on time for work, and was just not reliable anymore. I think as someone put it, he just wasn't Gage anymore. So people have been captivated by this injury, even to the modern era, and actually his skull and his tamping iron can be seen in Cambridge, Massachusetts. And so people have done all these experiments about, you know, what part of the brain did this tamping iron go through? And so I think what this traumatic brain injury teaches us is a very important lesson about what the frontal lobe does, because that's what the tamping iron went through. And the frontal lobe is important for personality, judgment, and executive function.
So executive function, what do you mean by that?
So executive function, I just think if you're an executive somewhere, CEO somewhere, what are you doing? You're making high-level decisions. But it's not just CEOs. Everyone is making high-level decisions, and that's what the frontal lobe is doing.